How's it going? Today we are going to talk about the camera that I believe is at the top of the food chain for video, the new Sony Alpha 1. Let's check this thing out. So interestingly enough, this camera had a lot of hype upon release, but most of it focused on the photo capabilities. This is the Sony flagship photo camera. It shoots 30 frames per second, 50.1 megapixel sensor. It's a great top-end photography camera, but it also has some really key video features. And the top line one, the headline grabbing one, is 8K video. And as soon as this feature was announced, just like with the Canon R5, a lot of people typed away and were saying, why are we getting 8K video? Who's asking for this? Who needs it? Who's going to actually shoot it? And I think it all makes sense. And I think this camera is secretly Sony's king of video. So as you guys probably know, I owned the Sony FX9, which I believe to be the previous king of video from Sony, and I actually sold the FX9 for this camera. So why did this camera interest me and not the FX6, A7S Mark III, FX3? Well, let me get into it. I've done a couple of professional shoots with this camera. By no means am I ready to do a full review or give full opinions. This is all first impressions and really why I bought this camera. But I've done a couple real estate videos. I've also done a styled shoot, shot a lot of 8K, shot a lot of 4K 60, taken a lot of photos with this camera, and I have been absolutely blown away and vindicated in my decision of selling the FX9 and purchasing the A1. So let's start with the image quality, and let's start with why does this camera shoot in 8K? I think partially it is a little bit of a necessity for a high resolution, small form factor sensor to shoot in 8K instead of oversampled 4K. And so what oversampling is when you have a high resolution, let's say 8K on this camera or 6K on the Sony FX9, you are actually downsampling that into a 4K image. The alternative is a process called pixel binning or line skipping, and that yields a lower quality final image. So you'll notice that the FX9 is a really big camera and it's downsampling a 6K image into a final 4K image. So image quality wise, the 4K from the FX9, 6K downsample, looks pretty similar to the 8K from the A1. It's my opinion that the FX9 is doing this oversample in order to provide a file that's really easy to work with, easy to edit, and you get a very comparable image quality. But what are the pros and cons of shooting 8K natively as opposed to an oversampled image? Well, to start, obviously you can deliver things in 8K. That's not really anything that anyone in the industry is considering doing right now, but you can also crop and reframe your shots. You can apply extra layers of stabilization without losing resolution. And ultimately, it's just really astounding how large and dense these images are in terms of just pure resolution. I was shocked the first time I dragged a time lapse that I shot on the Sony a7 III onto my 8K timeline, and I actually had to scale it up instead of scale it down. So the resolution for the video file was actually more than a photo on the a7 III. And so for me, that brings up actually another benefit as somebody who does event videography and provides event photography. The added benefit of pulling an 8K still from a video is actually really important, and I think is going to be really important in the future as well. Now, I'm not predicting that event photographers are going to get squeezed out of the market, but I do think it can add a competitive advantage if you're a videographer and you can offer some form of screen grabs that can be used as high resolution prints or high resolution images for social media. That's just an added benefit for your business. Now, there are also some cons to shooting in 8K, namely the H.265 or HEVC format. So this is going to tear up your computer a little bit. I'd recommend a proxy workflow for the 8K files, which isn't my favorite and probably isn't your favorite, but it's my opinion that it is absolutely worth it for all of the things you can do with those 8K files. Even though as an editor, I probably do prefer the MXF files, the all intra that comes out of the FX9. It's much easier to edit. You don't have to use proxies. You can do a lot more in real time. The 8K is going to languish a little bit, and it's going to take a little bit more time on the back end, but you get that added benefit of a competitive advantage when it comes to stills. You get the ability to reframe things. So playing into the idea of oversampling the sensor, the Super 35 4K is actually really nice, and it's better than the full frame pixel bend 4K on this camera. And that's something that's actually important to me, the added flexibility to be able to punch into APS-C mode and then clear image zoom another 1.5 times beyond that. It gives you extra versatility on the end of your lenses. You can turn your primes into zooms effectively, and I really like being able to do that. It's something that kind of kept the FX9 around, is the ability to shoot a really nice Super 35 image, which in the FX9's case was a 5K downsample. This is something that, again, cameras like the A7S Mark III, the FX3, and the FX6 do not have the ability to do, because these are all low resolution video cameras. That's not to say that these cameras aren't good for what they do. They are just a little bit more specified, whereas I view the A1 as just an all-around, very versatile package that can do almost anything. Okay, let's talk about overheating for just a moment. So the FX9 overheating is never going to be a problem. The camera is a workhorse. It's designed for any type of video production, shooting long days, and just being an overall beast that you never need to worry about overheating or any issues like that. The A1, for me, has not overheated yet. I've also not done any dedicated overheating tests, but actually, the first job I did with the A1 was actually a live stream, and I had the camera plugged into USB-C power. I wasn't recording on the camera, I just had the camera on, and I actually saw the overheat warning, and I unplugged the camera. So one thing that I do believe is powering this camera via the USB-C is going to heat up the camera much more than using batteries. What I can tell you is this camera is going to be perfect for something like a wedding, where you can shoot 8K reliably throughout the day and then maybe switch to 4K during things like ceremonies and toasts, where they're long form and you need these long takes. Another thing that I really appreciate with Sony's is that they have very good recovery time. So if the camera does overheat, typically you can turn it off for a short amount of time and lower that format and then immediately get back to shooting for a decent amount of time. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a few things that I'm gonna miss from the FX9 moving to the Sony A1. And a lot of these are workflow-based things or conveniences that a dedicated cinema camera offers. So these are things like XLR inputs and built-in variable ND filters. The importance of those things I've stressed in the past. They're so convenient, and I really love having them all built into the camera. So moving to this camera, I am going to have to do a few more things externally, like bring audio recorders and use external NDs that go on the end of the lens. So that's a bit of a sacrifice that I'm making in terms of the body and in terms of the form factor. But overall, I think what this camera offers makes it worth it. Probably the biggest thing I'm going to miss from the FX9 was shooting in Cine EI mode. Basically, it allowed me to use an input LUT and get a raw readout of the sensor at 800 EI and 4000 EI. So there was never any gain added, there was never any noise reduction added. This was a raw image coming straight off the sensor, and you could monitor it with an input LUT, so you could get a good idea of what your final look was going to look like. So when I brought that footage into post, it was just as simple as applying the LUT and I've got that final look. Cameras like the A1 and A7S Mark III don't have this feature. They just have a gamma display assist function, which works okay, but it doesn't fully show you what your final image is going to look like. So it's going to add a little bit more post time dialing in that final look. I also think that a sensor like the A7S, FX3, and FX6 is a little bit of a specialty sensor in that it has those base ISOs of 640 and 12,800. Because of that, a lot of people call that sensor the king of low light, and while I won't disagree that it's the best in extreme low light conditions, it does struggle in that middle range. And so the A1, I believe, is far more useful with its second base ISO of 4,000. Being somebody who shows up to shoots with lighting and tries not to add any gain to my image when I can avoid it, I believe that 800 and 4000 is a much more useful range than 640 and 12,800, but I also do have an A7S III that I can use if I am in one of those extreme low light circumstances. So in closing, I really think that the Sony A1 is the new video king. Based on all these features and including some top-end photography features, I think this camera is a better fit for our business than the FX9. Was very sad to see the FX9 go, but again, very happy to have what I view as the new king of video for Sony.